Welcome to today's video where we're going to be looking at how to set the needles on here. Please excuse the fact that this one's super dirty. It's just one I pulled off of my parts pile. I don't think there's actually anything wrong with this one. It was just one I got as a core and never got around to fixing it up. So maybe I'll do a trans temp conversion on this one later and sell it because this inlay is just ruined. It's super dirty. Things to note on this repair, though, getting back on topic of how to set the needles on these things, a couple of things you need to note. First of all, depends on how you power this thing up of where the oil pressure is going to be. You need to short the pin that goes to the oil pressure to ground, which if you buy one of these with the connector, his harnesses already have it like that. This one, I've modified it. So if you don't have it shorted to ground, that's about how your oil pressure is going to sit. So it'll be a little bit beyond 180 degrees from flat right there. And then another thing to note is the voltage tends to drift over time. Normally, if you're given this thing about 14 volts, it's going to show a little less than 14 volts, and that's how this one is right now. I know to you guys, because of the perspective of the camera, it does look like it's right on 14 volts, but it's not. So that's another thing to note in watching this video. Don't use this as your reference to exactly where the needles go. Use the board before you modify it as your reference. Just because you're dealing with the camera being aimed about here when you really need to be looking at it directly on, so parallaxing is not an issue for you with your position of your needles. Another thing, if you've done the OBS ones, you know that you have to take this support off on the OBS. That is not the case with these. So the OBS, it actually rests a little bit lower, so it'd be like pushing down against this all the time. But that's not the case, or sorry, the 1999 to 02 clusters. Another thing I want to just briefly discuss before I actually show setting these is really the only time you would be taking these off is if you're either changing the inlay, so that means marking them with a pin doesn't really work, putting the tape down and marking with a pin because you're going to have a different inlay on there. And the only other reason is you had to change a motor because a motor was either bad or jumpy. And a lot of times I get a lot of questions about this where we are putting the new oil into the motor. I get a lot of requests to do it as a service. I don't like actually offering that as a service. I like it to be something that I'm doing extra without even mentioning it, of like, oh, I rebuilt your cluster, and by the way, that one gauge will be slightly less jumpy. Because the problem you have is these motors, they don't sell them anymore, and the oil dries out inside them. So, well, it doesn't dry out, but you know what I mean. So it's almost like a grease that's inside there. So if you were to unwind this entire motor here, so you take these tabs off so that way you could slide the assembly out and then unwind all the copper windings off of it and take a look at it, you'd find that it's just a plastic clamshell that comes apart, and it's really a grease that's inside there. And it's not practical to unwind and rewind these things every time they have problems with them. So what you do is you try to suck as much of the air out and create a vacuum inside it, and then let it pull this oil down inside it, and that oil is going to dampen it more than having no grease left inside it. It's still not perfect, which is why I don't like to actually offer it as like a service of, hey, I fixed your stepper motor, or your air core, because these are actually air core motors. That's another common thing is people call them stepper motors when they're air core motors. So I don't like to offer that as like a service of, hey, I'm going to fix it. It's just something I'll do extra and not really even mention it, because it doesn't make it good as new. And when you sell somebody something as a service, they're expecting good as new. So that's just kind of quick disclaimer on doing that, because I get a lot of requests or questions about that on the channel. And it's kind of like, well, it works, but it's not perfect. And so a lot of times people email me asking, and the big thing is they're like, yeah, I have like 3 jumpy gauges. It's like, well, for me to buy one that's I know is good, I'm looking at $40 a piece, so it gets really expensive fast. So that's just something to be aware of. But yeah, so let's say you got confused and you took apart your instrument cluster, and now you need to put the needles back on, and you realize, oh crap, these are not stepper motors in general. So just to give you a reference of getting it decent, but again, I'm telling you, do your best to take notes of where the needles were pointing, so that way you get them in there correctly when you put on. And it has to be powered up for putting these needles on. But let's, just so that way, I'm going to give this explanation. Don't use this as your standard for rebuilding instrument clusters. Use this as your, oh crap, I didn't take notes and I don't know where to put the needle, so I need to get them close enough to work. So this guy goes where the top of the needle is just barely above this line here. So the top of the needle here is just barely above the bottom of this line. So you're roughly there, if you can see that. Same with the mile per hour. It is the top of the needle is about midway through this this point here. Your fuel is about a needle width below E, so the width of this needle in between there. This is not a very good air core. So like this is what they're supposed to do. You know, they move and go back. This one, super jumpy. So this one's not a very good one. This would be a candidate to oil right here. But yeah, back on topic here. So a needle width below E. This, it depends on what kind of voltage you're feeding it. This depends on how you have it wired up. If you don't have your oil pressure pin going to ground, this is going to be where it goes, which is just kind of, imagine it 90 degrees from 40. So just go 90 degrees from 40, should get you close enough to work. And then coolant temperature, this one, I believe this motor has drifted. This one's showing it above, right, like the tip of the needle, the bottom of the needle right here is right above the 160. It really should be splitting it in the middle there. That's normally where it sits, is splitting it in the middle. So those are kind of a reference, just so that way you know if you're in one of those oh crap situations. I have no idea where these needles went, but I highly do not recommend using that as your permanent reference of this is how I'm rebuilding them all the time. Just take a picture of it before you take it apart and put them back where they were, would be my recommendation on that. So let's take one of these needles off so that way we can see how to set it. So we'll just set this mile per hour one back on there. So what you got to do is you have to have it turned on. So if we turn it off, turn the whole thing off, we got it all the way off now, and we put this needle on there. Let me take the stops off so that way we can rotate. I can just continually rotate this. This isn't a stepper motor. There's no stopping position. So I can't, you know, in the 03 to 07 classics, you know, you just can move the stepper motor to, oh, hey, that's the 0 point. It can't go any further, and just mark it, and then you just put it back on like that. That's a technique a lot of people use when they don't know what they're doing with these instrument clusters. So yeah, these don't have a position that they just go to, because see, now it's going that way. If I could do like this, so you have to have it turned on. You have to turn it on. Once you turn it on, the motor moves to where it's supposed to be. And then we got lucky and we were pretty close when we set it. We're still not where it needs to be, but we were pretty close. So now we just take it off and gently put it back on. And you should wear gloves while you're doing this so you don't get fingerprints and oil all over your inlay here. So I actually went a little bit low again. So let's take this off. This inlay is going to get replaced. This one's ruined. This one's got so much dust and debris on it, I'll never be able to get it clean. So this one's ruined, so I'm not wearing gloves. But when you do this, I do recommend wearing gloves. That way you don't get it. So again, we're trying to get it where the bottom of the needle on this one's cutting right about the middle there. Just get it lined up, push it down, and there we go. This time we're perfect. Yep, so that'll work. So then, and now I can put the stops back on there because I won't be spinning anymore. But yeah, that was the point I was trying to make, is these will spin endlessly. So don't rely on that same method you would have used with your 2003, 2004, because, you know, these have stepper motors on them. This is a stepper motor. This is an air core motor. So yeah, they're a little bit more difficult to set. It's about the same for setting your old body style ones too. So same kind of procedure there. And these are all done the same. They all behave in the same manner where they will rotate a full 180 degrees. But yeah, that's definitely, that one's bad. That one's good, 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 good. Yeah. This is the only one I would consider either oiling or replacing on this one. That's kind of your judgment test on these is, are they super bouncy? Okay, I should consider, you know, oiling this for the customer if they weren't complaining. Because they may not have complained that it was a problem. And so if it wasn't, you know, really a noticeable problem for them, there's no need to actually replace the motor. Just oil it and get them back on the road. So that way you can save them money. Because again, you don't want to have to charge them 40 bucks a pop on these things. These things aren't cheap because they don't make new ones. So the closest you're getting is new old stock of them, or you're salvaging off of old boards. So who knows how much longer that one's going to last you. So that's just stuff to be aware of. This should be a pretty decent guide of how to do it. Again, I'm not going to say, hey, this is exactly where all these needles go all the time. Not because these kind of vary with age. The needles drift a little bit. I like to keep things short and sweet and not have to have too much of an explanation. Because when you have to explain things, people start to think you're scamming them. So I just keep it simple, and I tend to not change it unless they're like really far off. Like this temperature gauge is far enough off, I would change this. I would put this back to where it goes, because that does matter. This one's reading about a needle width higher, so it's a whole notch higher than it should be when you're looking at it at the correct angle. I know it doesn't really look like that to you guys on the camera because you have this angle, but looking at it at the angle you'd be looking at in the car, that's definitely a needle width higher than it should be. So I would correct this, and I would just mention that to the customer. Battery, yeah, it's reading a little lower than it should, but I'm not going to fix it. You know, it's one of those, that's just unnecessary explanation to the customer, in my opinion. Okay, well, I hope you guys liked this video. Be sure to check out the next video that comes out. It is going to be on the update to IPC Hammer, which lets us test these instrument clusters and do some programming to them as well. So make sure you check that out, and I will see you guys in the next one.